Well, Peter, Paige, thank you so much for being here at Inciting a Riot.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I am so honored to get to talk to you. You are one of those people that has been a part of my life without you knowing it, of course, for decades now. So I've gotten to follow your career for a really long time, and I'm so excited to sort of celebrate that career with you.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
you broke out in the show Queer as Folk, which folks my age at this point know as this massively groundbreaking show that came out in 1999, a year after Will and Grace, and 2 years, most notably, after Ellen DeGeneres famously came out. So that was a
I actually think we went on the air in 2000 for the record,
Oh, you
but
did? Okay, I'm sorry.
I think,
IMDb lied to me.
I think the British came out in '99 is what I think happened. The British came out in
Gotcha.
'99. That's yeah.
Gotcha. But you were pretty close to that era of it's sort of dangerous to make queer films, queer cinema generally speaking.
Yeah, I wasn't sort of close to that. I was absolutely a part of that. I mean, when I came out early on, Randy Harrison and I both kind of, the publicist at Showtime came to us both as the show was launching and was like, listen, people are going to ask you about your sexuality. You don't have to answer. You don't have to say anything. We support you, whatever you want to do. And Randy and I looked at each other and we're like, we're going to be on this show and like be evasive about our sexuality. No, we're not doing that. So, but when we came out, we were, and I mean this literally, we were a handful. There was Wilson Cruz who was out. Alec Mapa was out. And that was like it. Like that was it. There wasn't anybody else. We would go to the GLAAD Awards and I would be the most famous person in the room. It's a completely different world now, 20 years later. So, them was different times.
So what was it like being in those different times, in that bubble of making this show? Did it feel like you were breaking ground? Did it feel dangerous and edgy, or did it feel like a job?
Sure. Yeah, no. I mean, I was old enough. I was 30 when that show launched, and I was old enough that
No. You were
yes,
not.
I
Wow, oh my
was.
gosh, how did I miss that? Holy
I was.
crap, whatever you are I want whatever that is. Good
I think
genes,
you
babe.
have it. You look about 12 yourself, so I don't think you have
Oh,
anything to worry
bless
about.
you.
I was 30 when that launched, and so I had grown up with no images of LGBTQIA people in the media. None. They just didn't exist. I was like watching Bewitched for the sort of coded Uncle Arthur references, and RuPaul sort of had just appeared on the scene, and
Supermodel of the world.
Supermodel of the world, and RuPaul had not just appeared. RuPaul had been around for a while, but in terms of sort of like television,
Sure.
and I was, by the way, like I got very, very, very close to playing Jack in Will and Grace. So I knew that it meant something. I knew it was important. I knew what it would have meant to me because I was just coming out of that phase of my life where I would have so welcomed, media depictions that looked something like me or seemed something like me. I remember we used to call each other and say, oh my God, Ricki Lake has gay people on her talk show. Like that, literally, the subject of the talk show was these people are gay and they're willing to say it. Like that was the whole hour was, club kids being like, I'm gay, okay? And, and I remember watching like the first Tales of the City, which was, 6 hours or something. And all of us just like huddled in an apartment, like watching on PBS, just like, oh my God, I can't believe there's gay sexuality being referenced, much less depicted, So I knew it was important. I knew that the only thing we couldn't do with that material was shy away from it. Like we had to go at it. I knew it had been a big hit in the UK. So, and I knew that we weren't shying away from it. My very, very first day on set, I had just arrived. I was there for a costume fitting, and Randy and Gail like walked out in bathrobes, like their very first day of shooting, they were naked and having sex. And I was like, well, ain't nobody backing away from this. So here we go. So, I was aware that it mattered, and certainly excited. Oh, by the way, like Showtime prepared us for bomb threats the day the show launched.
Well,
Like
I mean,
that
I have
was
to imagine because up until that time, gay people on screen, queer people of all stripes on screen were pretty much relegated to, a hairdresser or the disastrous sex worker who died in an alley of AIDS with 27 needles in their arms. And there weren't really any other depictions. We were either a cautionary tale or we were comedic backdrop. And you were right there on the cusp of us being something else, something human. And
thanks. That was super important to me too. Because Emmett, I mean, even the creators, even Dan and Ron will tell you that Emmett was sort of conceived to be a wisecracking queen on the sidelines.
sure.
Frankly, that was being done elsewhere. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? There were wisecracking queens on the sidelines of a lot of things. And
sure.
I was like, we'll see about that. Like, I wanted him to have depth and nuance. I went to my first costume fitting, and it was like, I mean, she ended up not being the costume designer for the show for very long. But when we were doing the pilot, there was this woman. She was lovely, but she had done this kind of research from the outside, and
Mm.
literally the sketches she had for my character were like me in like a big like floppy hat and like a sarong. And I was like, I mean, sometimes, sure. But
Yes.
like he also wears sweatpants. And
Yes.
and that was always my bargain with the costume designers. I was like, I will wear anything you want to the nightclubs, to my jobs, to parties. Like I will wear anything you want. But at home, I want him in t-shirts and sweats. Like
Yes.
he's just a human being who happens to be, effeminate and occasionally flamboyant and over the top. So those things mattered to me, and I was also super grateful that they gave Emmett a full romantic and sexual life, as messy as it was.
He absolutely did. And that was something that I very much appreciated about Emmett because he could so have easily been relegated to just, you know, uh, Mikey says a line and Debbie says a line, and then you're there to, haha, you're the guy slinging
Yes.
the joke there. But Emmett has a full arc. Emmett is sometimes a bad guy. Emmett is
Emmett fucks
imperfect
up.
and
Emmett gets
flawed and
messy.
human.
Totally. But
And
Emmett thinks he's sexy, and other
mhm.
men find Emmett sexy, and a lot of effeminate men came up to me in that time and said, "Thank you. Like you give Nelly Queens a good name," and I was like, "Good. Nelly Queens deserve a good name. Nelly Queens are awesome. Without Nelly Queens, I don't think the movement would be where it is today. So." Yeah, those were all the things that mattered to me. And fortunately, I was very, very lucky that Dan and Ron almost instantly saw what I was doing. While we were shooting the pilot, they came up to
Mhm.
me and pulled me aside and said, "We didn't think we'd get a real actor for this part. We thought we'd just get a quippy queen and call it a day. But we see you, we see what you're capable of, and we're going to write to that." And they did. To their credit, they did.
That's amazing. So I want to go back and reference something that you talked about on the first day of shooting that happened. But there was, you know, of the two that I can think of, gay shows at the time on TV, you guys and Will and Grace, you all actually had sex on screen, and quite a lot of it. Queer as Folk separated itself by explicitly ensuring that audiences knew that queer men had sex.
And that was
That
a big
that
part of their lives and a big part of their stories. It wasn't just, I mean, yes, sometimes I do think it was a little sensational, and sometimes we
Oh,
just did a lot
sure.
of it to
The guy
be
in the
immature
scuba
about it.
gear and the
I don't even remember that. Was there a guy in a scuba gear?
yeah.
That one I've blocked. But it was a part of our lives, just like it was a part of my life. Sex was
Hmm.
a huge part of my life, still is, who I'm having sex with, who I'm not, all that stuff is part of particularly the gay male rituals of dating,
Hmm.
of finding your partner, of fucking up your partner, of fucking up your relationship, all those things. So
Did it feel like did the sex part of it feel, oh gosh, did it feel sensationalized? Did it feel groundbreaking at the time, or did it just feel like, oh, finally we
um,
have penises?
all the above, all the above. I mean, they were, when when I got my contract, so the way TV works, when you're an actor and you're getting close to getting a series regular role on a show, you have what's called a screen test, and it's your final audition. Well, before you go into your final audition, you have to sign your contracts because they don't want you to know that they've chosen you, because that puts you in too strong a negotiating position, right? So they negotiate with all the final people. And when they sent over my final contracts, there was a 20-page nudity writer attached. 20 pages that said, basically, you may not have any sex in this pilot, but these are the kinds of stories we're telling, and your character will be expected to participate in these stories. And then it had a bunch of sex scenes from the pilot attached.
And did you immediately hit the gym, or?
At that time, I had like 0% body fat. It just naturally, I couldn't put on weight at that age to save my life. So I was like, it is what it is. I mean, I did go to the gym, and I was going to the gym, but like, and I did stop eating, anything that had flour in it, but that's another story. But the main thing was my manager, who was openly gay and very supportive of my queerness. Like, he wasn't at all, he wasn't one of those who was like, you have to be in the closet or anything like that. But he called me that day and said, I don't think you should take this job.
Really?
And I was like, why? And he said, look, we both know your career is about to happen. Like, I have been so close to so many things, including Jack on Will and Grace and several and multiple other shows that did or didn't go. And he just said, I'm worried that if I put you on this show and then I want to take you to ABC to test for a sitcom, they're going to say, I can't put this guy on ABC. I just saw him getting ass fucked over on Showtime. And I thought about it, and I called my best friend, and she pulled some tarot cards, and she said, and she, by the way, she was inclined to agree with him. Like, just her gut was like, maybe he's right. And then she pulled tarot cards, and she just literally laughed, and she was like, I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, you have to do the show. It's going to change your life, and it's going to change the world. So you have to do the show. And I was like, good, that's what I needed to hear. And I basically took the position that, like, if this was my last job, it was my last job, and I was contributing to not only entertainment, but to the movement. And I still feel that way.
Can I ask what the casting process was like? I mean, what's it like sitting in those rooms, the roundups and all of that in the 90s, knowing that, like, what roles were you going for? What roles did you try for? What was it like being in those rooms? And what were some of the things that you were asked to do?
You mean sort of pre-queer as folk, or you mean?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Look, I came to LA at 27. Okay. And I'd gone to acting school. I was a classically trained actor. I'd done a bunch of theater in the interim. And then I came to LA with kind of no credits, booked my very first audition, which was just a big guest spot on an NBC sitcom. And cried for 4 hours because I felt like it was the universe telling me, like, you're meant to be here. There is a place for you in the business. Yada, yada. Because I had left New York with my tail between my legs. Like, I failed. There's no place for me. I'm too gay. I'm too ugly. I'm never going to work. But I came to LA, and I was making a name for myself as this kind of quirky character actor who, I wasn't just playing gay roles. Most of them were gay, but they were mostly quirky. I was playing, bitchy assistants, but also playing like horny straight neighbors, and like just and everything from like the boss who's too young to telling you what to do to, I don't know, the nervous undertaker. That was my very first job. So I went out for a lot of stuff pre-Queer as Folk. After Queer as Folk, though, if a breakdown didn't say gay in it, I couldn't get in the room.
Really?
I went through 2 managers, both of whom were like, well, you're not like Emmett. This should be easy. Like, you're so talented. I expected you to be totally different when you walked into my office. So great. And they just said every time they would pitch me to the casting directors, and they would say, oh, we're not going gay with this. And they were like,
we're not going gay with this.
It was, to play a DA on Law and Order or something. You know what I mean? It's like, you want to watch somebody, navigate a fucking closing argument? I can do that. I'm a classically trained actor. I can scan a Shakespearean sonnet. I can, you know what I mean? Like, I can still do Richard II soliloquies. Like, I know how to do that stuff. Nobody couldn't get arrested after that. for that kind of stuff. If it was a hairdresser or a sassy shoe salesman, by all means, let's get Peter. But I had spent 5 years playing Emmett, and I was just like, I got to do this with depth and nuance, and I got to do, great comedy and heartbreak and melodrama all in one role. And I don't need to do it for I don't need to do it on some sitcom. Like it just wasn't interesting to me anymore. And that's a big thing that pushed me to start writing and directing.
I want to talk about writing and directing, but before I move away from you in front of the camera, I just have to say there is a TV show that I feel like I made up, or that it was made just for me. And it is called Rick and Steve, the happiest gay couple in all the world. And I love Rick and Steve. That is one of my comfort show. I love that show with a fierce passion. And great. I think I am the only human being that's ever, where is the show?
I don't know where it is now.
Netflix.
It's so funny. Somebody, by the way, just hit me up about this yesterday and was like, please do more Rick and Steve. And I was like, I wish. I would love to.
I swear, about 10 times a year, I tweet about it. And I'm like, dear God in heaven. Lady,
I know. It's gotta be something. By the way, that show, it won the International Festival of Animation. Which the year before, like The Simpsons had won. Like it was considered the best animated show in the entire world that year. And we got to do, I think, 16 episodes. Is that what there are? Two seasons of 8, right?
2 seasons.
Yeah. And
it ended on a cliffhanger, and
You need some closure?
I just need some closure.
I understand.
I need Hulu or Amazon Prime or Netflix to wheelbarrow you some money. And just make another.
I would do it in a heartbeat. By the way, full credit to that show goes to Alan Broca, who wrote and directed it. He, that is entirely him. Like we were just puppets.
Wrote and directed half of independent queer cinema.
All of everything that has the word eating in it, he has directed.
I love all 5 of the eatings. Don't worry.
He's such a lovely human and so talented. And I just thought that show was so smart and funny and just completely insanely inappropriate. I came off queer as folk when I was doing that. It made me blush, and I was like, good for you.
It goes some places, and you don't expect that to go there. And it's the Lego Movie meets the other side of Pornhub. It's great.
It's so true. That's very apt. What you just said is very apt.
So
I'll say this: I'm not sure we could make it today. I think we get canceled.
Well, yeah.
I think a lot of that humor somebody would just be up in arms.
There was a brief period of time in sort of that late mid 2000s, early 2010s when you could sort of make that irreverent go all the way there comedy, and then it was taken as a joke by the people that everybody was in on the joke with you, and we are away from that now.
That is the truth.
So you created, executive produced, and show ran a little show called The Fosters.
I did. That is true. I co-created it with Kathy Redewig, my writing and producing partner at the time. And a woman named Joanna Johnson came on and show ran it with us. The 3 of us all ran it together. I just want to give them credit so it doesn't sound like I'm taking all the credit for it. But I'm incredibly proud of it.
Very famously, Jennifer Lopez did something with it, just sprinkled some fairy dust on it or something.
That's pretty accurate. Yes, she sprinkled some fairy dust.
So when you were creating The Fosters, how had developing storytelling, how had developing stories like that changed since you were, in those rooms about to launch Queer as Folk?
It felt like a natural extension of queer storytelling. It was like, what there hadn't been at that time was a lesbian family drama. It just didn't exist. And when Brad and I sort of realized that, we were like, holy shit, yes, this is so right. And ABC Family, which was what Freeform used to be called, their tagline was literally a new kind of family. And we were like, you want a new kind of family? We got a new kind of family for you. And it just seemed, it was so obvious that I think sometimes people have missed it. In fact, they told us this story when they were picking up their pilots for that year, deciding which pilots to make. I think they bought about 40 scripts. They had narrowed it down to 10, and they were going to make 3 pilots. And everyone in the company reads all the scripts and talks about them and sort of makes their case for everything. And somebody said, well, my favorite script was The Fosters, but I don't know if there's a hook. I don't know if there's an edge. And somebody was like, there's two moms. It's nowhere on television. Trust me, it's a hook. People are going to talk about it, especially in the middle of the country. Like maybe because we live in LA, it's obvious to you, but there's plenty of people who have never seen a lesbian-run family before. So trust me, there's a hook. And then somebody in that room apparently said, well, I just want to say, I don't think we should make it. And that's what got it made. That there was somebody in that room that they knew there was going to be controversy, and that was important, that it was going to be that hook was going to be splashy enough, because everything else about the show was quite traditional and quite conventional.
Sure.
It was a traditional family drama about a non-traditional family. That was the whole gag.
I love that. I loved that. One of the things that I loved about it, actually, you know what? I want to ask, did it give you any sense of irony when that manager that told you that you couldn't get trotted over to ABC and then you sold a show to ABC?
Well, it was ABC Family for one thing. So it was Disney, but not actually ABC. It didn't. He had died since then. And by the way, I loved him. He was in pretty much single-handedly responsible for my acting career. So I don't begrudge him that at all. He really was just looking out for me and the best way he knew how. But it was thrilling to go, yeah, we're going to tell stories focused on, an audience under the age of 18 about a family that they may have never seen before. And I think it mattered. I think, like Queer as Folk, I think it changed people. I think it opened people's eyes. And I still, to this day, I still get thank you tweets about The Fosters. I still get messages from girls watching it with their best friends. And it's now playing in more countries around the world. And there's still, it's still a place that young women, particularly young queer women, feel seen and feel something they might aspire to.
I think one of the things that I really liked about it and that felt so authentic to me was that everyone was the correct age, which is strange for some reason on a drama about a family to have children the age of their own characters, because oftentimes...
Well, they weren't quite. Let's be honest. I mean, Hayden was the right age for Jude. But if you watch Hayden, like, he grows so much in the first season. It's like
does.
It's bananas. And the kid, everybody else, Maya had just turned 18 when we shot the pilot, and the twins were 17 when we shot the pilot, but they turned 18 before. So they were playing, 15. Maya was playing 16. They were close to their ages, but they weren't.
But you didn't have the CW thing of 30-year-olds playing 16.
By the way, one of the shows that I almost got right before Queer as Folk was a show about freshmen in college called Sagamore. And I was up for it. I think I tested for it 5 times. And I was fully 30 years old, and it was to play a college freshman.
And we all remember the illustrious, long, many seasons of the show Sagamore, was it?
Sagamore. No, but it never got on the air.
Oh, yes.
They made the pilot and it didn't go anywhere. But that was that. Just so you know, like I was in that soup. I was playing 18. At
sure.
30. So yeah.
I mean, take the jobs you can, right? But so I'm glad that you brought up Jude, because Jude holds a very special place in our household. My husband and I adored Jude. Obviously he mirrored a lot of the experiences that we had as, growing up. We loved Jude so much that we named our pet bird after Jude.
Oh, I love that.
So how did you find the middle ground of showing how young people authentically explore their sexuality without infantilizing him in some kind of way? Because he has a journey. Exactly.
It was interesting. My first same-sex kiss, I was 11. I was younger than he was when that happened. And it was important to me. One of the things that I think the movement really needed to look at was because the sort of trump card that was played against queer people was, you're all pedophiles.
Mm.
The movement had, by and large, just put their hands up and walked away from anyone under 18. There were
Oh,
almost
absolutely.
no social service organizations aimed at queer youth. None. People wouldn't touch it. There were maybe a few in some of the major cities. That was it. And that, it just struck me as so wrong. And one of the things, and by the way, when we did that story, we got a bigger reaction to Jude's first kiss, which was as chaste as this.
Oh
I mean,
gosh,
that was
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
We got a bigger reaction to that than to anything on Queer as Folk. And I mean that.
Really?
I got called a pedophile. I got called a pervert. I got called everything that's wrong with this country. And gay people came for me.
I
Why are
remember
you
that.
doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you putting this on the air? You're making us look bad. And I was like, we have got to stop pretending that that queer adults don't start out as queer kids. We have to stop. We're not helping anybody, including ourselves. So,
And I think so many people forget that, I mean, regardless of sexuality, we all started off as children with flirtations and first kisses and first times. And if a lot of us are really honest with ourselves, some of those firsts happened a lot younger than we probably tell other people that they happened. And yet, statistically speaking, early
and
childhood
by the
sexuality, you
way,
began dabbling around that age, 9,
but
10, 11 years old.
the thing I used to say during that whole conversation was like, did you ever watch My Girl? Like,
Mm-hmm.
Macaulay Culkin and Anna Klumsky are 10 and they
Mm-hmm.
share a kiss. They share a kiss in that, and nobody was up in arms about that.
Mm-hmm.
It was the emotional kind of highlight of that movie. So it's this notion that gay sexuality is so fundamentally wrong
Mm-hmm.
that kids aren't allowed to engage with it at age appropriate developmental levels. Do you know what I mean? That is, I think we do terrible, terrible damage. And I think it's one of the reasons that queer people find themselves in these very late adolescences.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Stuck in adolescence into their 30s, 40s, 50s.
I'm really glad you can't see all the Disney memorabilia on my shelves on the other side of the room, because I felt very attacked just then.
I don't mean that. We're all
No.
allowed to, we're all allowed to have our things, but I just mean that, like, gay men partying at clubs into your 50s, like you're still
Sure.
in adolescence because you didn't get to have one, when
Absolutely.
you were that age. So I just think it's something we as a community need to continue to take on.
So you have gone on to write, to direct, to executive produce. Last year, notably, you launched the romantic comedy The Thing About Harry, which we loved in this house. I remember a time when gay comedies were, whatever two guys are willing to kiss, and that you found at a bus stop, and it was filmed on a potato, and it was, I remember. I remember the early days of queer romantic comedies, and
Filmed on a potato is going to stay with me because that's hilarious and true, wildly true. It was.
But
That was to have the big, to have the Disney company's blessing and to be able to make that movie, with a real budget and with real actors whom I adored and thought were so brilliant, was such a privilege. It was so fun.
But it's so impactful, I think, to so many people, because romantic comedies created by and for queer audience are starting to become not just mainstream, but a regular part of annual television and film releases. Did it get easier? Was it easier to make this movie now, or was it easier to make it because you've had success in the past and you've had a history of success? Or
Sure, it's always a little bit easier because people
Mhm.
trust you. And by the way, I made it for Freeform, who I had
Mhm.
been running a TV show for,
Sure.
5 years at that point. So it wasn't. So I was a known commodity to them, and so yeah. But that being said, still wasn't easy. It still was a lot of hoops to jump through, and months and months and months of, yeah, we're probably going to make it, but we're not sure. I know I was told on the QT that, like, right before they greenlit that movie, they made the executives do a big wide search to read basically every other Valentine's Day script they could find, just to make sure they weren't missing anything. So nothing in Hollywood is ever just easy frankly, even for the super producers, even for super producers. I was talking to a friend who was a big executive at one of the streamers, and he said, look, about 1 in 4 things at this point goes beyond development. And I was like, well, not from like, the big ones, the Ryans, the Shondas, the Gregs. And he was like,
sure,
even from them. So, we all forget because it's all about perception, but it's always, Hollywood is still a bit of a casino.
Is it easier to get queer joy on screen?
Sure.
Or is tragedy still the most palatable storyline for studios?
I don't experience that. I have to say, I never have that. Not in the last decade or so. It's not like people, came to me and were like, "Well, the thing about Harry needs a sad ending," or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, that was never
the thing about Harry is he was dead the whole time.
Exactly. Gotcha.
He's a ghost.
So yeah, I do think there's room for queer joy. And more than ever. I mean, there's still a lot more room for queerness, on all the platforms and on the broadcast networks and in feature films, like, for sure. But you certainly feel that, your generation and below are just like, I read some report that like over 50% of high school kids now identify as something other than straight. Back in my day, it was 4% and you were gay or straight, and that was it.
I was the gay kid in my town of 585 people. I was Emmett Honeycutt, my dear.
There you go.
9 Baptist churches. It was a great time. Such fun.
Right. So, and I know, and I'm not naive to the fact that like in your town of 585 people, it's probably still really hard to be a queer person.
Oh yeah.
But at least there are networks and communities and images, and there's stuff out there that you can find.
There's social media, there's YouTube, there's movies, there's the thing about Harry. There's all sorts of media out there now for people. But I do actually want to talk about that because it does lead me to talk about seeing ourselves on screen and seeing ourselves centered in stories, and seeing ourselves centered authentically in stories. So I want to talk about casting for a moment. There's been a growing conversation in recent years that points out that many queer roles are not played by queer actors. In fact, most of the Oscar-winning queer roles have been played by cisgender heterosexual people, from Brokeback Mountain to Love, Simon and its TV spinoff, Love, Victor. All of the leading queer people in question are played by cishet actors. Jared Leto got, an Oscar for playing a trans woman, and so on and so forth. There's 2 schools of thought, of course. One, you get the right actor for the right role. And of course, the other is that it's some kind of queer face akin to black or brown face or something like that. Where do you personally, maybe not as Mr. Producer, don't want to make any headlines or any gotcha moments or anything, but where do you personally fall in that line of thought?
So, look, it's a very nuanced, difficult conversation. I am largely of the latter school. I am largely done with straight men mincing and lisping and running around and calling that queerness, because I think more times than not it's something put on as opposed to something lived and experienced. And you and I both know that a childhood of femininity is a particular experience of shame, of joy, of connection, of seeing the world a particular way that shapes kind of everything and every facet of who you become. And I think that often gets left behind. That is not to say there are not some beautiful, glorious, nuanced performances by straight men playing queer characters. That is not to say that is not true, because it is true. There's
of course.
But I'm really done with like, oh my God, he was amazing. Just because he was, lisping. I kind of can't stand it anymore.
And getting credit for a wonderful performance to, oh gosh, it's such an acting stretch, such an acting stretch to kiss a guy. Oh, let's give him an Oscar.
Exactly. And I'm really, really ready for queer people playing queer roles to get celebrated too, which just doesn't happen very often. When a straight guy plays it, it's, oh, what a stretch, amazing, so transformational. When a gay guy does it, it's like, oh yeah, well, I just thought that's who he was. You know what I mean? And it's just not fair and not true. And it still takes incredible vulnerability and skill to embody any humanity on screen.
Absolutely. And the thing is, you bring up, I mean, the way that you talked about developing Jude as a character, but even the way that you talked about developing Emmett as a character, and the fact that, you were able to bring nuance to these roles. You put a straight actor in some of those roles, or somebody that doesn't have that lived experience, and it can very easily become something else, something false, something inauthentic. And that can be kind of harmful at times, frankly.
100%. I mean, I think it was it Tracy Lissette? I'm not sure it was, or Jenny Bowen, like, who talks about the trans experience, right? In Disclosure, I think it's Jenny maybe,
Yep.
who talks about how part of the danger for trans people in this world is that they see these roles that straight cis men put on and take off. And that there is this kind of culturally accepted idea that transness is something you can put on like a costume, and therefore it is stealthy. Therefore, it is a choice. Therefore, it is being wielded like a weapon, like they're spies or something, and that contributes to the culture of violence against trans women in particular. And I think that that's really valid. Another great example, just sort of a more positive example that I want to talk about, is like, I've seen Angels in America maybe, I don't know, 10 times. And the last production that came out of the National Theatre in London that Andrew Garfield and Nathan Lane did. Nathan Lane played Roy Cohn. I've seen Al Pacino play Roy Cohn. I've seen Larry Pine play him, Ron Liebman. I've seen many, many great actors take on that role, and they were all great. Nathan Lane blew my mind. He was hands down the best Roy Cohn I've ever seen. And it's because his Roy Cohn was rooted in shame. His Roy Cohn was rooted in rage, in the rage at not being the kind of man that the world told him he was supposed to be. And that nuance, that difference allowed me to relate to him. He wasn't just this bombastic monster that he often is in productions of those plays. And I just, so that to me is the gift that's there if you're willing to do the extra work and try to find queer artists to play queer roles.
You're somebody that now makes rooms where things happen. You cast people. You make some of these rooms and find these actors. How do you go about casting people? How does the industry go about casting people? I mean, like you said, this is such a nuanced conversation. I mean, you probably don't go into a casting room and say, "Who do you sleep with?" Obviously
You
not.
can't. You can't. It's
Right.
illegal. You're not allowed.
Of
You're
course.
not allowed. So it's a really, really, really tricky thing. And it's also a thing that's changing. One challenge that you come up against when you're looking for queer actors. By the way, the thing about Harry, Jake Borelli, openly gay, Nico Taro is straight. I loved Nico's performance, and he, to his credit, never for 1 second put anything between him and Harry. He literally, all he did was just go like, oh, I just opened my heart to both genders, like to all genders. Like it just that's all I have to do. Just open it up. There's no difference between me and this guy, except that I am fully sexualized to any and all body parts, basically. And it was such a beautiful, fearless way to throw himself in. So again, as I said, there's plenty of examples of good cishet actors playing queer roles that I think are wonderful. We looked high and low for queer. I wanted to cast only queer actors, but we ran out of time. And and I mean, Nico was fantastic, and we knew he was fantastic, but we ran out of time. I had to go start shooting a movie. So I didn't, I had Jake. I knew I had one of them was openly queer, so that was something, and Jake was also just phenomenal. But it is not easy. And when you're trying to cast queer actors, the simple, like I'm casting 30-year-olds basically, right? They're to play 20, but the actors are in their late 20s, early 30s. Or I think they were mid 20s, late 20s. But so I'm seeing everybody from 20 to 30, right? Well, a lot of those actors that I'm seeing for leads in a movie, the straight actors have been working since they were 12. They've played boyfriends and best friends and jocks and bullies and student council presidents and. So they come in completely, completely ready for the experience of being on camera in every frame of a film. They've worked it up. Acting on camera is hard, and it's not something you can learn how to do in a classroom. You need to learn how to do it by doing it. Mm-hmm. And then the queer actors would come in, and they would have played like the queer best friend in one episode of something. Or they would have had like 3 lines as like the funny student council president, who's uptight and queer on a Disney Channel thing. But like they just don't have the breadth of experience because they haven't been given the breadth of opportunities. So it's a problem. And, I think a lot of marginalized communities are looking at this in every facet of the business. It's like, you have to hire women directors, you have to hire Black directors. Well, great, but they're not being supported and trained to succeed. So you have to it's a pipeline problem. You got to go all the way back and change the way that you're thinking about the entire process. And that's big systemic change.
Did you relate to that after having been one of the only queer people on a set, like Queer as Folk, in which you're one of the only queer people there?
Of course I do. And I relate to it in that, my people I went to acting school with, people who I know I'm every bit as talented as, worked a lot more than I did up until Emmett. You know what I mean? Like my agent, when I booked Queer as Folk, he called me up and said, congratulations, you hit a hole in one. Like you pulled off a miracle. And he basically said, and you didn't do it by just being the hottest guy from your hometown. And he called me, and I was like, okay, thanks. Thanks. I appreciate that, Harry. But my point is, yes, I do understand all of that.
Queer as Folk is getting a revival. Is Emmett coming back?
No, they have completely, it's a new city. It's a whole new cast. They've distanced themselves from us entirely. It makes me sad, if I'm being really, really honest. I want nothing but success for them. I really, really hope it's fantastic and they do fantastically well. But I'm sad that it's getting a reboot that none of us get to be a part of, because I love Emmett and I miss Emmett, and I'd love to put on some leather pants again and see what happens.
I would love that too. Peter, Paige, thank you so much for being here. I know you have to go. I appreciate all of your time. You have a good rest of your night.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. There's my call.